If you want to use AI to build your custom application, then you are the right place. For this project, we are going to build AI-powered developer assistant application, and that is your intelligent programming companion that understands your code, solves problems, and helps you build better software. Before we get into code, let's look at the UI for this project. We're going to have a navbar with a home page and then with a login in. And here is a hero section, and I can view the source code for this project, and I can click here to start coding now. And these are the features for this project, and that is AI-powered intelligent, smart solutions, secure, and private. This means unless you are logged in before you can use this project, and only login users can see their own chart. Any other login user will not see your chart, which means it is private and secure. And for this project, we are going to use React with Firebase and Gemini AI API. The Firebase is going to use for the authentication. So let's look at the live demo. So I'm gonna click here, or I can click on start coding now. And before proceeding, unless I log in, and I can register either by using my email or password, or I can log in with Google. This is where Firebase comes in. I'm going to log in using my Google account. So as you can see, unless I provide my Gemini AI API key before I can proceed. And then below here, it says that don't have the API key, get one here. If you click on the link, it's going to take you to the right link to create your own API key. So I'm going to create one, and I'll show you how to do this one. For the meantime, let's look at the live demo. All right, I'm going to copy this code, and then back here, I'm going to enter the key and then continue. As you can see, the welcome message, and that is, hello there, I'm here to help you with your programming questions. And these messages are from us, and you can modify this one to suit your need. So let's look at the logic behind this one. When you enter your key, we are going to save the key into the local storage. So if I open the local storage, which is application, and then we have Gemini API key and then the Firebase authentication. This means a user is logged in. And if you look at the API key for the Gemini AI, here we go. So always the application is going to check if the user has provided an API key. So if I remove this one from here and then try to reload, it will ask me to enter my key and let me provide. So for this AI, it is purposely for developers. So here I'm going to say that JavaScript code for formatting date, and then let me send. And this is a result from the AI with well-formatted response. And we are going to use a package for formatting the response. So this is what we are going to build. And one cool thing is that all the charts are being saved into Firebase. So even if I reload, I will still see my chart. So this is what we are going to build. But before we get into that, let me show you the packages that we are going to use. We're going to use Tailwind CSS for the UI, your package with Formic for form handling, React icons, and Framer motion, which has this cool effect. As you can see, is because of this package called Framer motion, and Formic for form handling, and Gemini AI package for easy integration into our project. And this is the official documentation for the Gemini AI where we can get our API key. So for this project, we are going to focus mainly on the main logic. Because of that, the starter template will be provided. All what you need is to clone this project and run npm install, and it's going to install all the packages for us with Tailwind CSS being configured. But in case you want to start from scratch, then you can use fresh React application. To get started, let's go ahead and clone this project. But I prefer to use a GUI from GitHub. So if you search for GitHub desktop, and go ahead and download for your operating system. For me, I have already downloaded, and this is my GitHub desktop application, and you need to log in using your GitHub account. So for this, we're going to use a GUI to manage our project. For me, I have a couple of projects already, so I'm going to click on the add here and then clone project. And in here, search for AI powered developer assistant starter. Click on that. It has been selected, which is this, and then select the location where you want to download this repository. I'm going to choose desktop, which is this, and then select and clone. For this, when I was pushing to GitHub, I forgot to delete the node modules. That is why it is taking some time to download. And it has finished. And one cool thing is that we can manage any changes here and push it directly to our GitHub. So let me locate the folder which is called AI Power Starter, and I have opened it using my preferred code editor, and that is Visual Studio Code. Let's open the terminal and make use of npm-i to install all the packages, and clear it and run npm run dev. And let me open this. And this is a starter template without any logic. This is a home page, and even if I click on the login, there is no logic behind this one. If I click on continue to GitHub, nothing will happen. It is time for us to implement the main logic. But before that, let's look at the folder structure for this one. In the SRC, we have the following: the component. We have a component that's going to prompt the user to enter his or her key. And we will go ahead and implement the main logic. And I will explain every bit of code that we are going to write. We have the chat, the home, login, navigation, private route, and we are going to take each of these one to work with. And then in the config, this is where we have the Firebase configuration and then Gemini AI integration. And in the utils, we have the authentication from Firebase, and then the app.js. This is where we are mounting all the components. Once again, I'll walk you through step by step how each of these folders and files are going to work. Let's begin with user authentication. This is where Firebase comes in. And in the configuration file, we have a file called firebase.js. To get started, unless we get into Firebase, let's search for Firebase, or better still, you can go to firebase.google.com. and make sure to log in using your Google account. And after logging in, click on Go to Console. Then click on Get Started with Firebase Project. I'm going to name this project as AI Powered, and accept the terms and conditions and confirm, and then click on Continue. And deselect Enable Google Analytics for this project, and then Create Project. In case you are new to Firebase, Firebase is a comprehensive development platform owned by Google that provides a wide range of tools and services to help with the developers to build and scale applications. And it has the following features: authentication by using either email and password, social login, for example, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and phone number authentication, database solutions, real-time database, cloud Firestore, hosting, cloud storage, and so much more. For this project, we are going to use the authentication and then Firestore to persist or store our chat history. So click on Continue. The next step is get started by adding Firebase into your app. And we can integrate it into Apple or Android or web, and we're going to use the web. Make sure to click on the web, and then I'm going to name this project, and let's provide the app nickname. And it says that the app nickname will be used throughout the Firebase console to represent this app. and nicknames are not visible to users. So I can use, for example, AI powered app and then click on register app. And all what we need is this configuration, so copy the entire code. And back to our project in the Firebase file, up here, paste that. And remove this one for now. And click on continue to console. And this is our app. I'm going to click on that. And then click on the settings here. And this one contains the information about our app. The next step is we are going to integrate into our React application. We may need a couple of methods from Firebase. So I'm going to bring this one up here and let me remove these guys. Let me explain this import, and that is initialize app from Firebase /app. And this is the core function to initialize Firebase in our application. The next step is get store. And the auto import is fine, and get Firestore is used to access Firestore database. And the next step is going to be get Auth, and that is from /authentication. Let's have the other import, then I'll explain what it means. The next one is called set persistence and then browser local persistent. The main purpose of the set persistence is that it is going to use to configure how the authentication state is going to be persisted. And then get Auth. This one is used to handle authentication services. For example, logging in, logging out, and so much more. And the next one is equal to browser local persistent. And this one keeps user logged in even after the browser refresh. So let's go ahead and then continue with the initialization. We have what is called const equal to this. Remove this one, and this is where we are going to initialize the app as a function. Then I'm going to pass in the configuration file, which is this one, into the initialize app. The next step is going to be the authentication. For the authentication, I'm going to use get Auth and then pass in the app instance. And that is from the initialization of the app. And then the actual database from Firestore, we're going to use get Firestore and then pass in what is called the app. And lastly is that we are going to set persistence correctly using the imported functions. And it goes like this: set persistence as a function call. We're going to pass in the auth and then browser local persistence, then use cache on that, and then pass in the callback function. And let's just log by saying that auth persistence error and then pass in the error. And that is it with the configuration. All what we need is to use this export. For example, authentication and database. And this is what we're going to use. The auth is going to use to handle user logging in, logging out, and database, and that is DB, is going to be used to save the chart into Firebase database. The next step is to have a function for performing all these logics, and that is logging in, registration, login with Facebook or Google. And to do that, you're going to have a utility function for it. And inside the utility folder, I have a file called authentication or auth. And I have imported these methods from Firebase for the authentication. Let me walk you through the purpose of this import. The first one is sign in with email and password. This is a function that authenticates users using email and password. And this one takes in 3 parameters. One is the auth instance, email, and password. And this is going to return a promise with user credential object. And then create user with email and password. And this function is going to create new user account. And this one takes same parameters as sign in with email and password. And this is going to create new user in Firebase authentication. And sign out, this is a simple function to log out the current user. This one takes only the auth instance as parameters and ends the user session. And then on auth state changed. This is an observer function that watches for authentication state changes. And this one takes the auth instance and a callback function, and the callback function is going to be triggered when user logs in, log out, token expires, and app initializations. And then Google Auth Provider. This is a class used to configure Google authentication, and is used to set up Google sign-in and can configure additional OAuth 2.0 scopes and custom parameters, and then sign in with pop-up. This is a function that handles pop-up based auth authentication, and this one takes in the auth instance and provider like Google Auth Provider and opens a pop-up window for auth flow and returns user credential on success. So let's go ahead and then perform these logics. In here, I have already imported the instance of the Firebase from the Firebase configuration file. In this case, the auth here. You may need this one in the authentication file. So let's begin with the logging in. And with Firebase, it's going to be simple. This function is going to take in the email and the password the user is going to use to log in. And let's bring in try and catch block, because we're going to handle asynchronous logics here. So in the try, it's going to be const user credential, which is equal to await, then bring in sign in with email and password. They're going to pass in the auth instance, and that is the configuration file, comma, email, and then the password from the function. This means upon calling this function, you're going to pass in the email and then the password. And we're going to return the response as an object by using user, and going to use the user credential. On that, we have the actual user, and then provide error, and at this point it is null. And in case something goes wrong, we're going to return an object by saying that user is null, and then the error is from error.message. We are done with the logging in logic using Firebase. The next step is that for the registration using email and password. And the logic is going to be the same as we did for the logging in. Therefore, I'm going to copy the try and catch. And then in the registration, I'm going to paste that. The difference here is to use a method called create user with email and password. And that is it. It's going to return the user, and in case we have an error, then we're going to return that. The next one is going to be the logging out. For the logging out, we're going to bring in try and catch. And then in the try, we're going to await the method called sign out from the Firebase, and we're going to pass in the auth instance. And then we're going to return error, and it's going to be null. And in case something goes wrong, we're going to return error, and I'm going to say error.message. The next one is going to be the auth state observer function. And this function is very crucial for handling authentication state in a Firebase application. The main purpose here is to set up a listener that monitors the user's authentication state in real time. This means it will trigger whenever user signs in, signs out, or even when their session changes. So in here, we're going to bring in return, and then bring on auth state change, and then we're going to pass in the auth instance, and then callback function. And then in the callback, we have access to the login user, and then we're going to call the callback and pass in the user. So based on the authentication state, this function is going to be fired. And lastly, sign in with Google. And we're going to bring in try and catch block. Then in here, bring in const and then the provider. The provider here is going to be new, and then Google Auth Provider. And then below here, you're going to get the user credential, which is equal to await sign in with Google. Going to pass in the auth instance and then the provider that we got from the Google Auth Provider. And lastly, we're going to return an object, and then the user is equal to user credential dot user. And then for the error, it's going to be null. And then in the catch block, return object error is equal to error dot message, and then user is equal to null. And that's all what we need on the Firebase side of it. Well, it's supposed to be signed in with pop-up, which is this one instead of that. All right, so guys, this is all what we need for the authentication part of this application. Now that we have these functions, it is time for us to use it in our various components. It's time for us to use these logics, and let's begin with the user login in. Therefore, in our project, we are going to find the login form. If you visit /auth, or when you click on this link, it will take you to the login form. And let's look at the route for that. In the app.shares, this is where we have mounted all the components. And like I said, I'll walk you through each of these one step by step. But let's begin with the authentication part of it, which is this route. And we are using React Router DOM for navigation, and I'm using router from the React Router DOM, and I have wrapped everything inside the route. This one is for the navigation. We'll get there very soon, and then bring in route, and this route is going to take individual route. And the first one is the home route, which is, if I visit / this is the home route. And there is a component that renders. And there is a home page component that has been rendered. The next part is going to have two types of routing. One is private and then public. For the private ones, unless you are logged in before accessing it. For example, the /chat. As you can see here, we are using a custom component to render the chat component. This means that in the private route here, we're going to make sure that a user is logged in before accessing this component. Don't worry, we will get there very soon, but let's focus on the login in logic, which is /auth. So if you visit /auth, this is the component. So let's locate the login in, and it's inside the component and then the login in. In here, I have already installed and configured Formic, and that is Formic form field, and then the error message from Formic, and then yup for validation. And I'm using an icon from React Icon, and that is FA Google, and that is Font Awesome Google. And I have imported all the logics from the authentication file that we just did, and that is login in, register, sign up with Google, and then use navigate for redirecting. And this is a schema for validation on the form. For the email, the user must provide a valid email, and this is a required. And for the password, the minimum is 6, and this message is going to be sent back to the user if the user is not providing a password which is minimum of 6, and then this is also a required. And then in the login in component, I'm managing some internal states, and that is registering, and set is registering, and by default it is false. And then the error as set error, and then navigate as use navigate for redirecting. And there's a function for logging in, and this one is for logging in using Google. And let's look at the actual form. It begins with is registering. If it is registering, then use create account, otherwise use welcome back. Or we can also say that if it is registering, then I'm going to say that join our community of developers, otherwise sign in to continue coding. Then this is where we are injecting the error message as error equal to that, and we are injecting it here as that. And this one is for the Formic form. I'm going to pass in the initial values. Email is empty and password is empty. Then I'm going to pass in the validation schema, and then the onSubmit handler for submitting the form. And in case it is submitting, these are the input field with the name, email, the type is this, and then the error message is going to be this one, and then the password field, and then the error message, and the button for submitting, we're going to disable the button if the user is submitting. And note that we are getting the is submitting from Formic as is submitting. And then if it is submitting, then I'm going to show this animation as animate spin. And then as you can see here, we have is processing. And in case it is registering, then we're going to say that create account, otherwise sign in or continue with Google, and there's a logic to trigger that. At the moment, we have dummy function for this logic. So let's begin with the first one, and that is handle submit. In the handle submit here, we're going to set error as empty and then bring in try and catch. In the try, bring in const, we are going to destructure from await. We are going to make some condition here. So bring in the parentheses, and if it is registering, then we're going to use the register user. And then gonna pass in, and we can get what the user is providing on the values. So in here as values.email, and then comma values.password. Else we know that the user is logging in, then we're gonna use the login user from our configuration file, and that is from the auth file. So if the user is logging in, what do we need? We will need the email and then the password as values.email, and then password is supposed to be values.password. And note that this component is going to be used for logging in or for registration, as you can see here. That is why we are making a condition as that. Well, let me destructure. Upon successful logging in or registration, you're going to have the user and then the error. Let me change to auth error, and below here, in case we have the auth error, and that is if the user is providing wrong details or wrong password, then we're going to set error, and by saying that auth error, then we're going to return. This means that don't move on to the next logics. And below here, in case we have the user, then we're going to navigate using the use navigate instance from here, and then pass in /chat. At this point, the user is logged in, therefore navigate the user to the chat component. And in case something goes wrong, we're gonna set the error. I'm going to pass in the error from Firebase, and I'm going to say that set submitting to false. And that is it. We have already binded the handle submit on the form. Let me show you one more time, which is this one. And these are the initial values. So let's try to register, create a new account. I'm going to call this one as joe2@gmail.com 1 2 3 4 5 6 and create. We have processing, and we got an error from Firebase, and that is configuration not found. This means that unless we enable these authentication methods in our application. So let's get into the Firebase, which is this one, and click on the project overview. And the next step is click on the authentication, and then click on the get started. So in here we have the following sign-in methods, either by using email and password or Google or Facebook or play games. For this, we're going to use email and Google. So to do that, click on that and then enable and then save. The next one is going to be so click on add new provider and enable Google sign in, and then select your email and then save. Alright, it is done. Therefore, we can now register using this method. And as you can see, I have been redirected to the chat component. At the moment, don't worry with this logic. The good news is that we have been registered and redirected successfully. So to see all the registered users, let's get into the application and click on users. As you can see, this is a current registered user, which is John2, and that is Joe2. And the next step is to implement logging out. But before we get into that, unless we notify application that, hey application, a user is being logged in. Therefore, we are going to work on the navbar and keep track about the login user. When a user is logged in, we are going to hide this login button and then display the username and then the logout. This is where the navbar comes in. So let's locate the component for the navbar, and that is inside the component and then the navigation. And let's look at the structure for this one. We have a state equal to user, and we're gonna get the user from Firebase. And this state is for opening the drop down, and we have a component called navlink. And for this component, it is going to take in two props. The first one is to, and that is which path the user wants to navigate to, and then the children, and this is where we are injecting the children. The children here is going to be the individual link name, and let's look at where we are using the nav link. And this is the AI chart for the logo. For Tailwind CSS, we're gonna have two versions of the navbar. One is for the desktop and then for the mobile. So let's begin with the desktop. And this is where we are using the navlink component. And note that we're gonna pass in two things, and that is two attributes and then the children. Whatever comes in between the opening and then the closing tag of the component becomes the children. So home here is the children. If you look at the navlink component, this is where we are injecting the home link, and this one is for that. And this button is for opening the drop down. And we are first checking if a user is logged in, then gonna show the private links, and that is the chat and then the user profile and then the username. We're gonna get the username from Firebase and we will get there very soon. And this one is for the drop down. In case it is open, then we're gonna show the user email and a button to log out. And we have already implemented the logout logic. And this one is for the public, and this one is for the mobile. It follows the same format as before. So now let's get the login user. And lucky for us, we have a hook called Firebase hooks/auth. And what we want is called use auth state. And the purpose for this is that it's a custom React hook that provides a convenient way to access Firebase authentication state in your React component. And it is part of the React Firebase hooks library, which offers various helpful hooks for Firebase functionality. And this is what we are going to use. So in here, instead of using the array, we're going to check for the login user. And we can use the use state hook, and then we're going to pass in the auth as that. And we have already imported the auth from Firebase configuration and then the logout from the utils/auth. And that's all what we need. With this one, we're going to have the login user. With this one being in place, let's look at the final result. And indeed, we have the drop down with this username. And I can go ahead and log out, and I can log in back. Let me try with the Google sign in. At the moment, you don't have that logic. So let me log in using this account as joe2@gmail.com. And as you can see, I have logged in. The next part is going to be the sign in using the Google OAuth. So let's get back to the login in, which is this. This one is for the handle submit. And let's begin with the login using Google. We're gonna empty the error and then bring in try and catch. And in the try, we're gonna use what is called sign in with Google and call it as a function. Remember that we are using the logic from the authentication file as sign in with Google. So if you locate the utils, which is this, and register, logout, and sign in with Google, and this is where we are using that. So I'm going to await it and assign the result as, let me destructure, I'm gonna get the login user as user, and then for the error, I'm gonna change to auth error. And in case we have the auth error, then we're gonna update the error state by using the auth error, and we're gonna return. But in case we have the user, it means that the user is logged in. Therefore, we can navigate the user to /chat. And in case something goes wrong, you're gonna use set error and then pass in the error.message. And we have already used this function. Let me show you where we have it, and that is the button that shows continue with Google, which is this one, and we have passed the function to the onClick. This means that when a user clicks on the button, we are going to call that function. So now let me log in with Google, click on that, and as you can see, we have the pop-up window, and the name of the app that we use is called AI Powered Assistant. And this is a name from Firebase. Let me log in using this account. And as you can see, I have been redirected and I can log out. We have already used the logout. When you get into the navigation, let me show you the logout, this one, and this is where we are using the logout function. Now that we have the authentication being set up, it is time for us to protect some of the components, for example, /. Even though a user is logged in, but if I log out, I can still access the /chat. As you can see here that the component has been rendered. This is where protecting of route or component comes in. So if you look at the app, we are using our custom component called private route. I'm going to pass in any component that's going to be private. So let's begin with the chat, which is this one. And let me show you the component for the private route, which is this one. At the moment, we have empty logic. And this is a component that's going to take in the children. And in here, we are returning the children. The children here represent the individual component that we are going to render. So back to the app.js. In this case, the chat here is the children. And likewise, the API key, this is the children. So this is what we are going to render. Let's finish up with the logic. So in here, we're going to check if a user is logged in. And as we did in the navigation, we're going to have the user, comma, set user is equal to use state of, and then pass in the auth. So this one will give us the login user. If you doubt, let's log the user here and let's check in the console. And we have now, this means the user is not logged in. But as soon as I log in, let me log in with my Google account. And now we have the login user as that. So you're going to make a condition that where this is supposed to be loading from the use state. All right, so here, let's make a condition. And that is if loading, then you're going to return by using a simple div by saying that loading and 3 dots. And in case we don't have the user, this means that the user is not logged in. Therefore, we're going to use the navigate component as navigate, and we're going to pass in where we want to navigate the user to, in this case, /auth. And that is the logging in component. Otherwise, return the children. So now, if I reload and then if I log out, as you can see, I have been redirected when accessing the protected route, in this case the chat. And I have been redirected to /auth, in this case this one works. We are going to implement the chat feature. This is where Gemini AI API comes in, or you can use OpenAI. In the config folder, we have the Firebase and then the Gemini AI configuration. And this is where we are importing the NPM module for the Google Generative AI. In case you use the starter template, then you have this package already being installed. The next step is that we need to get the user API key, and then we'll go ahead and then initialize the model. So let's implement the getting of the API key, and this is how it's going to work. It's going to be as return local storage dot get item, and we are going to use a placeholder called Gemini API key. We're going to use the same key upon saving into local storage, and this is where we are going to integrate the Gemini AI, and it goes like this: const API key is equal to get API key, and that is a function up here. In case you don't have the API key, then we are going to return null. Then below here, we know that the user has the API key. Then we can go ahead and talk to Gemini AI API or the model, and it goes like this: const gen AI is equal to new Google generative AI. Then I'm going to pass in the API key, and I'm going to return gen AI dot get generative model, and the model here is going to be Gemini Pro. I'm going to use the object and specify the model, and the model here is called Gemini-Pro. Depending on the time of watching this video, the model name must change, so you can refer to the official documentation. And we are exporting it here, or we can call the function and assign to a variable, and then we'll go ahead and then export it. So this one and this works similar. Now that we have this logic, it is time for us to use it in the chat component. So let's get into the chat, which is this one. And we have some predefined state, and that is messages and set messages, new message and set new message, loading, index, and then the authenticated user. We are going to fetch all the messages from Firebase and then display them accordingly. And this one is for sending new message. So let's begin with this use effect here. Before that, let me explain the index ready here. We are going to make sure that Firebase has indexed our message before we can access our chat. So in the use effect here, we have some predefined message, and that is hello there, I'm here to help you with your programming questions. And you can modify this one to suit your need. Note that this one is inside the use effect. So let's finish up with the main logic. So in the use effect here, we are going to check if a user is not logged in. Then we are going to return. Note that we are accessing the login user here by passing auth into the use of state hook from Firebase. Alright, so the next step is that we are going to initialize the chat, and it goes like this: const initialize chat, which is equal to async. The purpose for the chat initialization here is that it's going to check if the user has any messages. If no messages exist, then we are going to create a welcome message by using this text. So let's go ahead and then cut everything from here, and that is our custom message if no message is being found. So in the initialize chat here, we are going to get the messages from Firebase, and it goes like this: const messages ref is equal to collection, and I'm going to pass in the DB name. Note that we are using the DB from Firebase configuration. If you check in the config file, Firebase, we have the DB here, and this is where we are going to access the collection in the DB by using the collection and then the DB, and bring comma here. The collection name is going to be messages. This one will be available inside our Firebase dashboard. And below here, we are going to return only messages that belongs to the login user. This means if user A or B or C logs in, they will see their own messages than other messages. This is where queries comes in, and it goes like this: const user message query or messages query is equal to query, and I have imported the query from Firestore as query. We have used the collection and then the query here. So let's continue with that. And for the query, we're going to pass in these configurations. The first one is the messages ref, and we're going to use where, and we're going to use where to retrieve only messages that belongs to the login user. And in here, we're going to pass in the user ID. If it is equal to the login user, in this case, user.uid. We have the ID of the user on the user.uid. After the query, we are going to get the red document, and it goes like this: const, I'm going to call this one as snapshot, which is equal to await. Then we're going to use get docs. We use get docs to retrieve information from Firebase, which is get docs. And we're going to pass in the user messages query. Once again, get docs is a function that's going to retrieve document from the Firestore, and this is going to return query snapshot object. So after the snapshot, we are going to check if you don't have any message, and it goes like .empty. Then we are going to add this message to the Firestore or Firebase. So use await and then add document, which is from the Firestore as add document for adding document to Firestore. And then as a function call, I'm going to pass in the messages ref, comma, and then the object. And in here, provide text. Then I'm going to paste the message that I copied. Make sure to use backtick here, and then it must close as backtick. And let's also save the timestamp into Firestore, and I'm going to use the server timestamp. And I also want to save what is called row. I'm going to use AI and then user ID, and that is the user who saved this document, and you can get it from the user.uid. And lastly is welcome message, and I'm gonna say true for this one. So let me collapse the initialize chat here, and I'm gonna call the function as initialize chat. Then below here, we are going to perform the query as const kill for query, and I'm gonna use the query here and then pass in the collection, and the name of the collection here is going to be messages. So pass in the DB instance and the name of the collection as messages. And after that, bring comma and use where, and I'm gonna use the user ID if it is equal to the login user, and that is user.uid. Then we know that this document belongs to the login user. Then bring comma, and we are going to order by the timestamp, and it's going to be in the ascending order. After that, we are going to use the onSnapshot, and the purpose for this is going to create a real time listener for changes in Firestore. And it goes like this: pass in kill for the query, and the query here is going to use to filter the messages for the current user. And then bring comma and then the object. Then in here, we're going to use next, which is a callback function. And then in this callback function, we have access to the snapshot, and that is a document. So in here, let me use lowercase for snapshot as that. And then this is where we're gonna get the messages by saying that const message data is equal to the snapshot dot docs dot map. Note that on the snapshot, we don't have the red document unless we use what is called snapshot.docs, and then we're going to loop through to get the individual document. Therefore, we're going to pass in the callback function, and then I'm going to pass in the individual docs, and it goes like this. Then in here, I'm going to pass in the ID, and I can get it from the document.id, and then comma, I'm going to spread everything by using the document. On that, we have a method called data, and this is where we have the red document. Then after that, we are going to update the state by using set messages, and I'm going to pass the message data into it. For the snapshot, I'm going to assign to a variable as unsubscribe, which is equal to that. Then after we update the state, then we're going to update the set index, then we're going to pass in to true. And after the next, in case we have an error, we're going to call it as a function, and we have access to the error. Then in here, I'm going to say that set index, and I'm going to say true for this. And let me log the error into the console as error. And lastly, we are going to unsubscribe by using return, and then we're going to use the unsubscribe from the snapshot. And for the dependencies, we're going to pass in the user. Alright, so we are done with the use effect for loading the data from Firestore upon page load. The next step is going to be the handle submit for adding new messages. Let's get into it. So in the handle submit here, we are going to implement the main logic. So first step is that we need to prevent the browser default by using event.preventDefault. Let's implement this simple validation, and that is in case you don't have new message.trim or is loading, then we are going to return, and below here we're going to set is loading to true, and upon success we're going to say loading is false. This is where try and catch block comes in. In the try here, we are going to save the new message into Firestore, and it goes like this: const user message doc or document is equal to await, then add document. We're going to pass in the collection, and then as a function call, pass in the DB configuration, and the name of the collection is going to be messages. Then bring comma with these configurations by providing a property called text, and then we're going to assign to new message, and then timestamp. I'm going to use server timestamp, and then row for this one is the user, and then user ID is equal to user.uid. The next step is that we're going to pass the message into Gemini AI model, and this is where the instance of Gemini AI comes in. In this case, it is called initialize model. So in the chat here, I have already imported that model as initialize model. So I'm going to have instance of it by saying that current model is equal to initialize model as a function call. And in case there is no model, then we are going to throw new error, and the error, I'm going to say that API key not found. Please set up your API key. Then below here, we're going to pass the message to the current model, and it's equal to await current model dot generate content. And we're going to pass in this message as You are a helpful programming assistant. Please provide well-formatted response with code examples when appropriate. And then I'm going to pass in the user question. Then let's get the main response from the model as response is equal to, let me assign the result from the model as result equal to that. So on the result, we have what is called response.text from the Gemini AI model. And the next step is that we are going to save the response from the Gemini model into our database. Therefore, it goes like this: await, add document, as we did, pass in the collection, and then the DB configuration, and then the collection name is called messages. And you're going to pass in the following as a text, which can be found on the response from the model, and then the timestamp is equal to server timestamp, and then the row here is equal to AI, and then user ID is equal to user.uid, and then reply to, and we're going to use the user message, and that is user message doc.id. And in the catch block, we are going to console log the error, and then we're going to set messages as a callback function, and we're going to return an array. We have access to the previous state as previous, and then in the array, we're going to spread the previous, and then comma object with ID equal to date.now, and then comma text is equal to error, and then I'm gonna inject the error.message, and then the user ID is equal to user.uid, and let's bring finally, and this is going to be called irrespective of the state of the promise. And this is where we are going to empty the new message as set new message as empty, and set is loading to false. And that is it for the handle submit. And that is it for the handle submit. This is supposed to be semicolon. The next step is going to be the message content. Note that we are going to format any code that's going to be generated by the AI. This is where a package called React Syntax Highlighter, and in case you use the starter template, then you have this package being installed. And this is where we are formatting the response by using a component called message content. We are going to pass in the text, and that is a message, and then bring in the React Markdown, and inside we have the class name and then the component. These configurations are from the package. So in case we have p tags, then we are going to format it by injecting the children, and then for ul, ol, li, h1, h2, h3, a tag, and block quotes. And below here is where we are formatting the code, and then the actual text comes in here. So this is the component for formatting the message content, and we have a simple component for the loading, and this one is a header for the chat window with AI chat assistant. If I log in with Joe, well, we have an error. Let me check the console, and it says that on the chat component cannot read property of undefined. The issue is from the chat component, and that is in the use effect here, where we are using the query. This is supposed to be a string, and that is the equal to, and then comma here, also comma here. With this one, save it, and there we go. We have the chat window. So let's continue to see where we are using these functions. And this one is for the heading, which is AI chat assistant and your coding companion. And in case the index is not ready, then show this one and then the loading dot. And this is the message container where we are looping through the messages, and then the key as message.id, and we're gonna add some classes to it. In case the row is equal to user, then use justify end, otherwise use start. And below here we are also checking for the row. If the row is equal to the user, then it means that it is a login user, therefore you're gonna use u here. And here too, for the login user, we're going to use text white, otherwise use gray, and this is where we are injecting the message content by passing in the message as that. And in case it is loading, then we're going to show the loading dot, and this is the input form with the handle submit with the values unchanged and then the placeholder. And for the button, we are going to disable it in case it is loading. And if it is loading, then show sending, otherwise show the text as sent. Before it will work unless we provide our API key. So let's go ahead and implement the API key logic by allowing a user to enter his or her Gemini API key. We are going to allow the user to enter his or her API key, and we already have the component called API key prompt, and I have provided some initial state here. For this component, it is going to take the user API key and then save it into the local storage. Therefore, upon page loads or after logging in, then the application is going to check the API key in the local storage before allowing the user to use the application. So we have a state called API key and then set API key. And then for the error is submitting, and then is modal visible, and then set is modal visible. And this one is for the navigation, and this is for handle submit for saving the API key, or when the user hits the enter key on the keyboard, we are going to save the API key. So let's begin with the handle submit. First step is that we are going to prevent the browser default. Then we're gonna set is submitting to true, and then set error is empty here. Then the next step is that I want to reload the component after the user has saved the token into local storage. Then bring in try and catch for the main logic. So I'm gonna have a comment as store API key into local storage, and it goes like this: local storage dot set item, and provide Gemini underscore API underscore key. Note that the value for setting the API key must be the same when retrieving. So if you check in the, as you can see here, that this function is for getting the API key, and we use the Gemini API key here. The name of this must be the same as the one that we are setting into the local storage, and then comma the value that we want to store, and that is the API key. And then after that, we're gonna set is modal visible to false, meaning we want to hide that one. And then lastly is we want to navigate the user to the chat component. And in case something goes wrong, we're gonna set error by saying that failed to save API key, please try again later. And then bring finally, this is where you're gonna set is submitting to false. And then for the handle key press, we are going to check if the user is pressing on the enter as event.key, if it is equal to the enter, and in case we have the API key dot trim, Then we are going to call the handle submit, and I'm going to pass in the event. And that is it. And below here, we are checking for is modal visible. If it is true, we're going to say that you need an API key to continue to use this application. In case we have an error, we are injecting the error. And this is a form where we are binding the handle submit and then the value on change and then the on key press. And then for the button, we are going to disable in case it is submitting. And here we're going to have a state as saving or continue. And in case you don't have the API key, we have provided a link to get the API key. The next step is that we are going to pass this component to the private route. Let's get into that. Before we get into that, let's render this component. And in the app.js, we have a path which is called API key. So let me open that as API key, and this is the component. So for this one, if I enter something like this and click on continue, now let me check the local storage. And as you can see, I have saved into the local storage. I have to use the right API key. So it's time for us to re-implement this route. The first one is going to be the home route. For this one, it is going to be public. And then for the chat, before rendering this chat component, we are going to make a condition. Before that, let's check the authenticated status of the login user, which can be found on the use state of, and then pass in the auth as we have done before. We have the use state here, that is use of state from the Firebase hook, and then the authentication from Firebase configuration file. So before rendering this one, we want to make sure that the user has provided the API key. So here I'm going to check by getting the API key from the local storage. I'm going to have a function as has API key, which is equal to this function. And then we are going to return by saying that in case local storage is supposed to be curly braces, and this is going to convert a Boolean value, and that is .get item, and use the variable name or the placeholder as Gemini API key. And this is going to return true in case we have the API key in the local storage. So for the chat component, we are going to make a condition, and that is has API key. If it is true, then we're going to call the chat component. Otherwise, we're going to use navigate, and that is the navigate component. And then let's navigate the user to the /API key. Then for the auth here, we are going to check if a user is logged in, then we're gonna call navigate, and then navigate the user into the API-key. Otherwise, go to the login page. And for the API key also, we're gonna check in case a user has the API key, then we're gonna navigate the user to the chat. Otherwise, go to the API key component. And that is it. So it's time for us to provide our API key from Gemini AI. So let me visit Gemini API key, and I'm going to enter my right API key. For this one, we have already done it. And let me create a new one. Copy that back to the application. Let me log out, log in again, sign in, and let me remove the API key from the local storage, the one that we did. So when I reload, I'll be prompted to enter my API key. I'm going to enter that, and there we go. We have the welcome message. So if I say HTML code for logging in, and send. As you can see, AI is thinking, and this is my message, and this is a response from the AI. Alright guys, so here ends this project. Let's confirm that it is responsive, and indeed it is responsive. The last part is going to be the deployment. We are going to deploy our AI-powered developer assistant application to the internet. And we are going to use Netlify. So let's look at the process involved. First step is that unless you push our code into GitHub, so to do that, navigate into GitHub. And then I'm going to have a new repository for this. This one is for the starter template. I'm going to add new one, and then public, initialize as get, and then create. There's a name. Let me change this one to that, and then create repository. After creating, I'm going to clone using our desktop for GitHub. Let me search for that, and then I'm going to click on clone, and let's search for AI powered assistant, which is this. Copy the name and then search for that, which is the first one, and the location, let me place it on my desktop and select and clone. Alright, it is done. Let me confirm. This is the folder. So I'm going to copy our code that we have. Mine is inside React Firebase Gen AI chat, and I'm going to place it here. And the next step is let's check our repository, and we have these changes. Let's wait while the other folders are importing. Alright, so let me go ahead and open this folder, and let's remove the node module as that, and that's all what we need. And let's check. So I'm going to push this one to GitHub. I'm gonna say that final project or final code, and then commit to main, and then push to origin. Alright, it is done. So let me confirm, reload, and we have our folders. Next step is let's visit netlify.com and click on login or sign up in case you don't have any account, and then click on add new site, and then import an existing project and select GitHub. We are going to select the project that we push to GitHub, which is this one. Copy the name, and then back here I'm going to search for that, and then not this one, the first one. Let me provide the name of this project as Masync-AI powered assistant, and let me check the availability. It exists. And last step is deploy Masync-AI powered assistant project. Alright, it is in progress, and definitely you're gonna face some redirect issues. So let's fix that. So back here in the public folder, we're going to add a file called _redirect without any extension. And then let's have this code as /index.html and then 200. So we need to push this one to GitHub. So back here, well, it is done, but let's try to push this one. I'm gonna say that fixed redirect issues, and then commit to main and push to origin. So let me log in to confirm my deployment status, which is Masync-AI powered assistant. Click on that, and now our application is live. Let me also change the name So back to the code. In the index here, I'm going to change this one to Masync or just Masync AI. And let's also push to GitHub as added project title, and then commit to main and push. With this one, Netlify is going to redeploy our project. So even if I reload, well, after a few minutes or some seconds, it will be updated. So let's go ahead and try our project. And let me log in as joe@gmail.com and sign in. And it is asking me to enter my API key. Let me check if I don't have it in my local storage. I think locally I have it. So let me open this one. Let me copy this API key and back here. Let me paste that, continue. All right, now it worked. All right, guys, let's try with the Google sign in to make sure that it is working. It says that Firebase error, unauthorized domain. And this is a common issue when using Firebase authentication. We have to pass our deployed domain into Firebase. To do that, let's visit our dashboard, AI-powered application, and then click on the authentication, and then click on the settings. And below here, under the authorized domains, click on that and add the new domain. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it, remove this one, and then add. Let me try again. All right, and now it worked. All right, guys, so here ends this project.